I'm Chip Freund, and this is the Artist Spotlight, conversations with contemporary artists based on 5 simple questions that explore the artist's journey, creativity, and sources of inspiration. Welcome to another episode of the Artist Spotlight podcast. Today I'm joined by Mark Flowers. Mark is an accomplished, award-winning painter, mixed media artist, and art educator based in Western North Carolina. I met Mark recently at the opening of the Fine Arts League of Cary's annual Juried show, where his work, The Man from Cameroon, took second place in this national exhibition. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, sure. Could you give our audience a sense of a project you may have just finished or something you're in the middle of?
I'm working on a new series of works that actually I got a grant from the North Carolina Arts Council just to support the background, the making of it. Some works are here in the studio. I've always worked with photographs in my work and have created sort of a new, not technique, but at least a new direction with the work that I'll sum up as visual jazz. And it's autobiographical in many ways, but it's a little bit more freeform. But the main project is my wife was in the hospital at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and I took a moment to ride the commuter train from downtown Baltimore back to the city and sort of put my cell phone on the window of the train and just snap a couple of hundred pictures. Then coming back to the studio, I've used those as base elements, mostly texture, mostly a sense of movement, etc., as background. The new process that I'm working with is I use, you're reviewing the photographs you take. You like this texture, you like this movement. It's blurry. Things are you capture things you don't know until you review the cell phone. And I know the size of the panel I'm going to paint on. I send a Photoshop compilation of some things as a start for a painting. I send it off to a printer. There's a really wonderful printer here in Asheville, North Carolina, Dot Editions, that prints an archival image the size I want, the way I want, on the paper I want, and I adhere that to a panel, use that as the beginnings of a painting. I'm painting over it. I'm maybe holding off of some pieces with tape or reserving it, but then a lot of it is just beginnings of a mix, and it's a way for me to start a painting. It was great to get a grant recently because this isn't the cheapest idea I've ever had, and the grant supports the sort of internal, the printing of the images and getting it all ready to paint on. And I was grateful for them to see worthy to invest in me. But the end point is probably what I would call visual jazz. I went through a whole period of more like visual poetry, a very kind of direct narrative way of doing things. This new kind of level of the same thing in many ways is just a little bit more freeform, a little bit more relying on my 45, 50 years of making art, that the only thing I can relate it to is a jazz musician that is more into freeform. And so things come out that surprise me. I no longer have a vision of what the painting looks like in the beginning. Like I don't have, it's like this adventure that I get to go on that takes me someplace and allows me to follow my instincts and my sensibilities. And most of them, I'm halfway through them and I'm convinced I screwed up. I absolutely have screwed up, and this is just not going to work. And then I spend some time with it and I go, oh, there's a door. Let's go that way. And so it's for me, it's just an ultimate joy of making work. And maybe that's what it's about. Maybe it's just the simple fact that, I've been doing this long enough. I found a way to give me joy in making.
Well, hallelujah, because that's what it's all about in the end, I hope.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, this whole gig I've been doing all my life is more about me. It's more about me if I didn't have pleasure in doing work, doing the paintings, man, I'd have probably moved on.
But as artists, we're not doing it to get rich, that's for sure.
Well, when somebody, very few actually make a living off of this, but you make a life. And I'm more interested in that. I taught art all my life. That paid the bills. It's allowed me to retire, it's, that was the structure, and everybody's got to have a day job as far as I can figure out. I've got one student that has moved on and his day job is painting. It's really, in fact, that was the structure of the painting, the band from Cameroon, guy named Ludovic Noth. But other than that, he's the only person I know that's doing quite well. So.
Oh, there we go. Well, that was a wonderful opening. And I think you've already begun to touch on some of the questions, so we may revisit some of these
sure.
points. But the first question is, what is your earliest memory of making art of any kind?
It sort of depends. I mean, I come from my father was an artist. I was around someone working in a studio. That path was given to me many, when I was very young. At times I rebelled against it. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to do something else, and always ended up making art about not doing it. And, so I have childhood memories of making art, but I don't really call that real art, because all kids are creative. Kids along the way are taught not to be creative. I always had that. That was my, I was the, in junior high, I was the kid that got to do the bulletin board, that kind of stuff. So that was always reinforced. I would say that the earliest memory I have of making what I would call serious art is probably at the University of South Carolina when I was an undergraduate, and I had finally made a decision to be an art major. And that sort of being in an art classroom, getting some positive responses from a teacher who you admired. And so it probably goes back to the early to mid 70s. I remember a series that I did. I got kind of a little student grant, and I got to work in part of the art building that nobody else was in. And so all of a sudden I had a real studio. I could make, I had a bunch of huge stretchers and canvases, and I made a whole series of giant paintings. And that was just, I remember that as being really this wonderful time. And, it certainly laid the groundwork for the rest of my life.
Very cool. You talked a little bit about your current medium and technique. What drew you to this mixed media painting format, and what do you like about it? What works for you?
I think what I've done is combine a sense of sculpture and a sense of painting together. In graduate school, I didn't get along with my major professor, who was a painter, and got along with the sculpture guy. And all of a sudden ended up doing installation work. I still called them paintings, but it was installation work. It was that sort of wonderful time where you could just go for it. Have made some sculpture after all that, but I never really liked the idea that with a piece of sculpture, you've got to consider it from 6 or 7 different sides. It just didn't work for me. But I had this need to build things, and so my paintings are non-rectangular. My paintings are best described as, there are a lot of paintings that are metaphors for windows into the world, where you're looking at something and you could imagine it being a window looking beyond the space you're in. My works tend to be things that occupy the rectangle of the wall on the inside. They're objects that are hanging on the wall. They're not. There could be parts of them that are metaphors to windows into the world, but they still remain objects. And that goes back to, we'll talk about more, 2 of my favorite artists that I grew up in an impressionable time where they were the big deal. And so, I like the idea of paintings as objects as well as images.
I want to go back to your earlier comments about the project and the visual jazz.
Sure.
To me, and I'm a bit of a music fan. I wish I could say I was a musician, but that gene did not come to me.
I understand. Me too.
But I got 2 kids and a wife who are, so I get to enjoy it vicariously.
Oh, great.
But the thing that strikes me about jazz, and particularly the sort of improvisational element that I seem to get from you, in the sense that you don't know what it's going to be, is, would it be safe to say that both you and the work in progress are collaborating in a jazz sort of format, where a jazz trio might, somebody comes off and does a little riff, and then another one picks up on it and goes with it. So you see something begin to happen in that work that then takes you, oh, I'll go down this path. I'll go on down here. Is that a fair description?
Oh yeah. I think it's an exact, a perfect description, mainly because I'm not always in control. I guess ultimately I am in control because but I really enjoy doing something and then having to react to it, and there is this sort of cooperation. I'm using I like the idea that I'm using a cell phone and I record things all the time, but I'm recording it because maybe it's going to be a painting, maybe it's going to be in a painting, maybe it's going to be, whatever. And that to me is me looking and recording what I look at. I'm 67, so the memory is, it's sporadic at best. But to be able to just collect these things that then represent this moment in time, and I can now put it together. And I also, because I am 67, I can actually rely on my experience to put those together. I mean, certainly there are, the analogy doesn't hold up a whole lot with, there are young jazz musicians, but to me, it's the older jazz musicians that know what the hell they're doing. When we were in Cary, North Carolina, was it last weekend or the weekend before, we went to see a Herbie Hancock at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Guy's 82. And it was amazing to see how it worked for him. And I kept thinking about well, okay, I think you've got to have at least some years underneath your belly or underneath your butt or whatever, to be able to react in the right way, or in an experienced way, or in a knowledgeable way. That's why I think the paintings, and it's really great. I think the paintings I'm doing now are the best things I've ever done.
And think of it this way: if we get to a point as artists where we don't feel like our best work is happening now and that our best work is behind us, that's a very sad day.
It is. It is. And sometimes it's not determined by you, but I think there is an internal thing that, as long as I believe it, I'll keep making the work.
Yeah.
There could be other, there are plenty of artists that, they've become a big hit with a certain kind of imagery they're making. And as soon as they, what I call, evolve into something else, all of a sudden nobody cares. But a lot of that is a monetary kind of pressure. Fortunately, I've never had that problem.
Yeah, I can relate. So this takes us sort of naturally into our next question: is what inspires your art? Where does it come from?
I don't know where I heard it, and maybe it's a ripoff of a writer's creed is write what you know. I paint what I know. Most of my paintings are about things that have happened to me. Some of it, it's more complex than I want it to be, but other times, the painting right over my it'd be my left shoulder. I'm looking at is a painting about a good friend that passed away very suddenly, and he was a mentor to many people in the arts, and all of a sudden the conversation has stopped. And I think people relied on his words and his ability to decipher things. And it's about losing that conversation, but also realizing that you still got to carry on the conversation, and I guess questioning whether the weight is still the same or whatever. But the conversation is over, and that was a tough one. But it was a painting that is about emotions to me. So I'd say 90% of the paintings are about a bird hit the window of the studio last year, and it was dead on the deck. And so I took a picture of it, and and worked it into a painting. It doesn't there. I guess the term autobiographical doesn't necessarily mean they're all hugely meaningful, like maybe the painting about my deceased friend, but it's events. And I think that's how I've kind of worked in the photography part, or at least the photographic element. As soon as I say photography, it's like I'm not pasting photographs. I'm maybe using snippets of it, or I'm painting over it, or I'm using it as a direction. And again, in the painting over my shoulder, there's a figure there that was a figure blown up maybe 300 times. So it's a figure-like image. But so they're about me. I mean, I think what drives me to make them is that there's a relationship that starts somewhere that has happened to me. I'm telling stories. In a previous style of my work, the stories maybe were a little bit more obvious because they weren't as complicated of paintings, but yet they were stories that I could tell.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Well, and certainly something as complex as a relationship with a mentor who is passed, that you can't define that in a simple narrative. So I think it makes sense that it would get more complex.
Yeah, and it also, he wasn't that, and he was a little younger than I am, but it's all wrapped up into, at some point, I wonder which one's my last painting.
Hmm.
You know,
Wow.
uh,
Okay.
I'm hopefully I got a few more to go, especially because this grant thing, I got,
Yeah.
but I think at this stage of your life, I'm in my mid to late 60s. You friends are starting to pass away, or people you knew quite well, and you kind of, wow, it's just that time of life, and all gets wrapped up
Yeah.
into the pain.
Right. As we transition to our
Yeah,
next.
let's find a little bit more positive thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to an artist starting out?
um Seek your voice, but don't rush it. I think a young artist has to find technique first. I think they have to um, dance in the technique world, because that's the vocabulary, or that's the grammar in which you can eventually find a voice in. Um, I think too many young artists jump too quick. I'll never forget this one student I had years ago when I was teaching. He was kind of touted as like a big deal when he came in. I was teaching at the college level or university level, and he didn't want to do. He had to take painting one and stuff. He didn't want to do what to me is required of a painting one student. It's about learning the basics and building on it and going with it. And he just was very impatient with it. And I told him, I said, show me you know how to do this and I'll make it harder for you. But he never would jump into that. And eventually he decided to leave the school at the end of the term. And this last thing he ever said to me, pointed at my face and said, remember my name. I have no idea who that guy is.
Wow, there's a commentary for you.
Yeah, I have no idea. I couldn't tell you who he is. And he wasn't patient enough to build on things.
Mhm.
And honestly, I think he was scared. He came in kind of as a one-trick pony, had done some great paintings in high school, and wasn't willing to start. I mean, when you go from like the high school art guy to the university or the next level art student, you got to start over. And there's a point in that, is that you got to climb that ladder again. And I think too many, they get, our social media, Instagram, all the stories of, wow, this artist is making a killing at 19. I want to know what they're doing in their 30s. I bet it won't be art.
Mm. Yeah, so that's an interesting point.
So,
Yeah. In general, one of the other challenges with Instagram is it rewards the the momentary success, but does not encourage the journeyman approach to really developing a craft.
I agree, and that maybe that's old school. I don't know. I just I think the more painters that I look at, there's an explosion of art. Like on Instagram,
Yeah.
and I don't. I remember their images, but I don't remember their names as much. There is, to me, I'm more interested in the older painters. Maybe because I'm an older painter, but also, I think their journey is, you can see it in work, and it's more interesting.
Okay. Well, that then brings us naturally to our last question: is what artists should folks go check out?
Well, I and it goes back to the, you see a lot of art that you find interesting. I go back to my time when I was the kid looking for something, looking for a language to understand. And I go back to Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg. To me, they're the kings. And I had the privilege of, within the last couple of years, being in a museum and finding a Robert Rauschenberg I had never seen. And it was like I was at church. I spent a long time looking at the painting, and and I, maybe because I understand the processes of painting and so forth, I could see what he did. I'm looking at details, I'm looking at stuff, and but it was their sort of emboldened daring, I think, and again, probably when they were in their 30s and probably younger, but boy, they sort of, for me, changed the world. But I go and I see paintings on Instagram, and I find myself more attracted of late to non-objective work again, and maybe because I'm leaning in that direction more, yet there are recognizable imagery and stuff filtered into my work. I'm looking at that relationship of paint on surface, the edges, the drips. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. Not sure why, but I'm finding that much more attractive.
Oh, I have to check them out. I'm not familiar with their work myself, so I've now got some homework to do.
And Rauschenberg has passed, but Jasper Johns is still making work. He had a major show and at both the I think it was MoMA and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Might have been the Whitney, but I forget now. But and I just missed the show. Really wanted to see it. So he's still cranking away in his 80s. I love it.
May we all do that.
May we all be there.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, this has been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better and to take a walk down your creative journey with you a bit here.
Oh, that's great. I've enjoyed this too. And next time you find yourself in Asheville, let me know.
We'll absolutely do so. So for folks, if you want to check out Mark's work, probably the single best place is Mark Flowers on Instagram. As well as if you want to see it in person, you can check out the Penland Gallery at the Penland School of Craft, the If Art Gallery in Columbia, South Carolina, and Pink Dog Creative down in the River District in wonderful Asheville, North Carolina. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and tune in next time for another episode of the Artist Spotlight. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Artist Spotlight with Chip Freund. Find accompanying blog posts at chipfreundphoto.com/blog, and you may subscribe to our show on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like listening.